Pokemon Platinum is the greatest Pokemon game of all time. Or at least I think so. I spent the majority of 2009 glued to the TV watching commercials for Pokemon Platinum. I had only played Pokemon on my friends' DS's, and I was eagerly awaiting my birthday so I could get a copy for myself. I remember vividly the portion of the commercial showing off the Distortion world where the player would walk on walls and go down the vertical waterfall. Considering I didn't have my own Pokemon game yet, this one seemed like a great place to start, so I basically begged every friend and family member to get me a Pokemon game for my birthday. In April of 2009, my 8th birthday finally rolled around. We were out for dinner at McDonald's, as is the premier dining establishment for any 8-year-old on their birthday. And after dinner, as we were heading out to the car, my grandpa gave me a present. Being an 8-year-old with zero patience, I ripped it open in the parking lot, and I was met with a brand new copy of Pokemon Platinum. That night, I started my first ever playthrough, and chose Chimchar. I think I played up until the 4th or 5th gym on the first night, just completely lost in the game. I stupidly reset over this file sometime between 2009 and now, but I still have my original starter, my Heart Gold file, a level 70 something Infernape. Up until making this video, I always assumed Pearl was my first Pokemon game just because it was the game I played the most, but checking the dates on when I got this Chimchar, I now realize I started Platinum 2 days before I even got Pearl, which I think is pretty fitting for things to come. Since then, I've played every single Pokemon game from every generation. I took a small break around Gen 7 and came back with a vengeance around Gen 8, and I've been playing religiously ever since. When I got into shiny hunting, I stuck to the 3rd generation mostly just because those were the games I could stream and record. However, once I got my capture cards and started hunting in Gen 4, I became completely re-obsessed with Pokemon Platinum. Up until a few years ago, I only ever had my single childhood copy of Platinum, and for good reason, as the game has unfortunately skyrocketed in price in recent years. When I started hunting more on stream, I debated on grabbing some more copies in order to multi-hunt, but what I didn't know is that this would lead to a collecting journey that would last well over a few years. A fun quirk about the older cartridge games is that the language was hard-coded onto the cartridge itself. It wasn't until Generation 6 with X and Y that you could choose the language of the games. This meant that for every game that was released before this, there were about 7 or 8 different language versions released around the world. While you'd think the games would virtually be the same besides the translations, there are actually a few little quirks that are slightly different in different versions. But we'll get to that in a bit. Platinum was released in 7 languages officially, being English, Japanese, Korean, French, German, Spanish, and Italian. While sites will list Chinese as a release language, in my time looking around, I don't think Chinese cartridges were ever produced. If you've seen my previous videos on the channel, you know I already have quite a few of these cartridges, but I think we should start back from the beginning and go over how and why I decided to collect Platinum in every language. Now, before we start, there are 2 very important factors when buying these Gen 4 games online to look out for: pricing and authenticity. With the games going up in price over the recent years, a market is formed in producing reproduction cartridges and selling them for ridiculous prices. So there are a few tools I use to make sure I'm getting what I'm actually looking for. For pricing, I like to get a general estimate using pricecharting.com. The prices obviously aren't exact, but I always like to check to see a ballpark of what games are currently going for, and to make sure I'm not really overspending. A lot of used game stores actually use a price charting subscription service that gives prices on what to pay for trade-ins and what to charge for used games, so this is a good way to see approximately what you'll be paying. Another thing to watch out for are fake cartridges or repros. These are getting more and more difficult to spot, especially online, but I've put together a page on my website about things to look for when buying Gen 4 cartridges. There's way too much to go into here, but I've got the page linked in the description if you want to check it out, as well as another great website where I got a lot of my info from called GameVerifying.com. With the technical stuff out of the way, let's get into the fun stuff. This whole journey inadvertently started back in summer of 2022, right before Safari Week. Safari Week is a shiny hunting event hosted by Absol Blogs Pokemon, where the community comes together to hunt in the Safari Zone in a variety of different generations and games. One of my favorite videos from Absol has always been his 2021 Safari Week compilation, where he hunted in the Great Marsh in Platinum. I was preparing for my first ever Safari Week, and, taking some inspiration from that video, decided I'd get set up in Platinum to hunt for one of my favorite Pokemon, Tropius. I only had my single English Platinum at the time, and so I decided I'd grab a few more just to round out my marsh hunting. This was how I got my first 2 languages, Japanese and French. For the Japanese game, I bought it from my absolute favorite spot to buy Japanese games, j4u.co.jp. The prices are cheap and the shipping is insanely fast, usually within a week for me. Sometimes they're out of stock of Pokemon games, but if you check back often enough, they'll usually be back in stock pretty quickly. My first Japanese copy of Platinum cost me 34 Canadian. I'll be keeping a running total throughout this video based on how much this collection cost me, but I'll be leaving out shipping just because it'll vary a lot based on where you're from. Around the same time, inspired heavily by Absol's famous copy of Pokemon Platine, I was deep in search of my own French Platinum copy. I specifically remember riding my longboard to the park and sitting on this specific park bench, mindlessly scrolling through eBay listings. The sun was out and it was a beautiful afternoon on May 19th, 2022 when something finally caught my eye. This listing. It was not pretty, but it was indeed cheap, costing only 23 euros or 33 Canadian. I decided to take a chance with it, and a few weeks later I was greeted with a destroyed, though legitimate, copy of Pokemon Platine. I eventually had a close friend who makes stickers print me off a nice replacement, and though it isn't pixel perfect, it sure beats the sticky note it came with. For a year or two, these were the only copies of Platinum I had, and I was content with it. I did a lot of hunting on these cartridges and basically kept myself busy finding shinies in the meantime. However, eventually, I decided to grab myself a German copy. I explained the story in better detail in my Chimchar video, but this was when my obsession truly started, and when I officially decided I wanted to grab a copy in every language. I had my good friend from Germany, Tina, act as a proxy buying service for me, and she grabbed me a loose copy of German Platinum on the 11th of September and shipped it my way. This one cost about 50 euros or 74 Canadian and is still probably the favorite in my collection just because of the story behind it. By May of 2024, my obsession was in full swing and I had my eye on a very interesting cartridge, the Korean version of Platinum. These tend to be particularly difficult to get a hold of simply because they weren't produced nearly as much as the Japanese or North American copies. On top of that, getting products from South Korea can be a bit of a pain, so I had to do some online searching for a viable website to snag a copy from. I eventually decided on a website called Delivered Korea, which is a Korean proxy buying service. I did a bit of searching around and ended up finding a listing for about $65 or 92 Canadian, so I pulled the trigger. It eventually came in the mail a few weeks later, which is when I discovered some very interesting quirks about the Korean games. The first thing I noticed when starting up the Korean Platinum was the text color. Instead of the red text color you'd find on the file select screen when playing as Dawn, it's this really pretty bright pink color. And it doesn't stop there. In the summary screen, where natures and routes are generally highlighted in red, it's actually highlighted in blue instead. I still cannot wrap my head around why this single version of Platinum has these different colors. I admittedly know very little about how Pokemon localization works, but I would have assumed most of the work went into the translation and the Pokemon names. The fact that someone went out of their way to make this tiny change to text color in only 2 spots is incredibly weird. Another fun quirk of the Korean Gen 4 games is that they're only able to trade with other Korean copies. According to Bulbapedia, because Pokemon Korea and Nintendo of Korea didn't debut until after the initial release of Gen 4, the non-Korean games never supported the Korean alphabet. Due to this, the games simply can't communicate with each other. However, it is still possible to migrate Pokemon of any language up from Generation 3. Anyways, enough about Korean Platinum, let's get back on track. With my collection getting closer and closer to becoming finished, I admittedly was also getting a little more bold with my spending. Only 4 days after ordering my Korean Platinum, I was on eBay looking for a Spanish copy. I definitely could have waited a little longer to look for a better deal, but I ended up grabbing a loose Spanish Platinum on May 20th, 2024 for $86 or about 121 Canadian. By this point, every subsequent purchase cost more than the last, and with only one language left to grab, that wasn't about to change. So let's talk about my most expensive purchase and the mess that came along with it, the Italian Platinum fiasco. On June 6th of 2024, I was deep in my usual ritual of looking through eBay for my next language of Platinum. While the other copies had been relatively easy to find, I was having a lot of trouble with a loose Italian Platinum. There were complete in-box listings, but they were overpriced and just way too expensive to warrant buying when I could just wait for a better deal. There was one single loose listing at a decent price, but it was suspicious to say the least. First and foremost, the image quality was terrible. There was one single photo of a Platinum copy on a DSi XL and that was it. And the elephant in the room, of course, while the listing said it was an Italian Platinum, it was very obviously a Spanish copy in the picture. Despite this, the bid was very low, and frankly, I was feeling a little adventurous. Maybe the user was new to eBay and just didn't know how to properly put together a listing. Maybe the picture was wrong and they really did have an Italian copy. Maybe, just maybe, I could snag a legitimate copy for dirt cheap by playing along. I eventually ended up messaging the shop owner to ask about why they have a Spanish copy in the picture. They responded, assuring they were sending me an Italian copy. So, I eventually won the auction for dirt cheap and began the long wait for the cartridge to ship. If we want to ignore the abysmal listing and the incorrect picture, which we will, the first true red flag came when the user relisted the Platinum after I bought it. I sent another message to them asking why, and they simply replied that they had a shop and they were selling multiple copies. Sure, no problem. The shop owner then took their sweet time shipping the cartridge, and I didn't get any sort of notification until June 20th. By then, I had already opened a dispute against the owner for basically ghosting me, but they eventually apologized, said it was already shipped, gave me a tracking number, and I closed the dispute. By now, I was admittedly a little nervous, and I was 99% sure I was getting a Spanish copy, or not getting anything at all. However, against all odds, it eventually arrived. I grabbed it from the mailbox and brought it home to tear open, and lo and behold, an Italian Platinum. I couldn't believe it. It was too good to be true. And when something is too good to be true, it usually just is. It took about 2 seconds to see that this cartridge was a reproduction. A fake. Had the seller actually had an accurate picture on the listing, I would have easily been able to tell it was a fake. So, I put together a dispute to eBay explaining the whole debacle. How the listing had the wrong image, how the cartridge that arrived was not the one that was shown, how it was a fake cartridge, and so on and so forth. I expected some pushback and was preparing to fight with the seller and support to get my money back, but eBay support was incredible. Within a day or two, I already had my refund, and while worrying about getting the seller to pay for return shipping, support got back to me and said I didn't even need to send back the item. So I got to keep this as a souvenir. A profane idol of greed. Believe it or not, after this roller coaster, I really wasn't interested in taking any more chances with buying this last copy of Platinum. On July 5th, with not many other options sitting around on eBay, I bit the bullet and bought a complete inbox Platinum from a reputable Italian shop. This one was my most expensive by far and put me back about 92 euros or about 137 Canadian. But this time the seller was great. They made sure I meant to buy an Italian copy, they warned me about how shipping may take a while, and they kept me in the loop the entire time when shipping the cartridge out. After a tough 2 weeks of waiting, it was finally at my door. A glorious, complete in-box Italian Platinum, legitimate this time, and in basically mint condition. And with this, I had finally completed my collection. So, let's talk numbers. The grand total for 6 languages of Platinum, not counting my original English copy, was only 491 Canadian. This is roughly 342 US dollars. I think this is a great example of how searching for loose copies and waiting for deals can make these games way more affordable. On top of this, most of these copies came from eBay, but I implore you to search around locally or on other sites. eBay is historically overpriced when it comes to these games, especially if the listing has been up for a while, and you can find crazy deals on your local languages if you monitor Facebook Marketplace pretty regularly. Now, you didn't think I'd forget a shiny, right? After getting my Italian copy, I felt compelled to hunt something neat for the team. Perfectly coinciding with this arbitrary decision to hunt a random shiny in this playthrough was a family vacation. We visited extended family up in Ottawa, and I started this hunt as a fun way to pass the time. Unlike other hunts I've done, I decided not to keep track of encounters nor the time spent, and I just wanted to be able to bring my DS around with me and mindlessly reset while hanging out with my family. The vacation came and went, as well as a few more weeks after that, and I eventually got down to recording this hunt on my capture cards. I hunted a good chunk of it over on my Twitch channel, which I've linked in the description if you feel like dropping a follow to come hang out during the next hunt. Despite this, I ended up getting this guy off stream while chatting with some friends. Oh, shiny Porygon! Yeah, we finally got it. Look at him, he's beautiful. We did it. Inginua. I don't know what that means. Anyone speak Spanish? I didn't take Spanish in school. You guys did, right? You're Americans. All right, there he is. Truly a beaut. Okay, even though that was just sitting there this whole time, do you fellas have any nature guesses? No, we can go with that. No, that's fine. John's don't guess as fast? Alright. Modest? Alright, what do we got here? Okay, what does this mean? Naive. It means naive. Ben, that's your usual guess, isn't it? Huge. Huge. Congrats, Ben. I'll send it to you right now. Yeah, it's coming. Alright, let's check him out. Regular Staravia. Shiny Porygon. Oh god, my poor Porygon, bro. Let him out. Escapaste. Once I found the shiny, I still had a bit of work to do that night. I know a lot of hunters, particularly those who are working towards a shiny living dex, tend to box their shinies as soon as they find them. But I've always loved actually using my shinies, and I get a ton of enjoyment from training them up and maxing out their EVs. So the same night I found our friend, I evolved him through the trait evolutions with the intent of getting him in fighting shape. After evolving him, I moved on to the EV training. Porygon Z has a surprisingly high special attack stat, so I prioritized that alongside speed to hopefully get some mileage outspeeding the other Pokemon. Once he was evolved and trained up, I had one last task to work through before setting up for Combi, Maylene. With Porygon and a little help from the team, I beat Maylene and finally got access to Fly. And I got a pretty neat shiny out of it too. I'm planning on hunting some more shinies in my other copies of Platinum, so stay tuned for some new stuff soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.